Yes.
Yes, Joe.
Sure.
Okay, that's good. Okay, I'm literally a Zoom virgin as regards chairing a meeting, right? So expect a few glitches along the way, but I'll do my best. Okay. Does anybody want to actually give a brief introduction before Usman comes along to introduce the discussion?
Maybe Ed, could you?
I don't know. I certainly haven't prepared anything.
Well, look, Ed, let me just make some points, and maybe that'll stimulate you to, to come in on some other broader points. I mean, I think the blurb was that we had, the introduction and the invitation to the discussion, was very apposite. It talked of a revolution, and in a way, people argue, well, what does a political revolution look like? It's not a social revolution, but let's see that the general development in Africa, particularly in West Africa, has been towards, the word is authoritarian systems. And I think the word authoritarian covers a lot of ground, including most brutal killings, as well as, generally ending democracy, or let me use the term electoral systems, as in Mali, which has now happened with Putin sending in support of one kind or other. And the anti-French imperialism, the mood of anti-French imperialism has risen, and that's been taken on against all political parties in Mali and in the countries in which there has been the military taking power. Now, it looked as though Senegal was heading in that direction when the outgoing president decided to postpone an election. And then there was a youth uprising, youth and workers, but it was, against the current, if you could put it that way, quite decidedly so. And eventually the courts decided that the president had no right to delay, as it turned out for some time, the elections, and that the elections had to be held. The election then took place on a most extraordinary basis, with the leader of the opposition then arising from prison, and within weeks of being rising out of prison as one of the youngest politicians claiming change, coming to power, which is quite an extraordinary development, where you in a continent in which most of the political leadership is geriatric, and refusing to move aside, not only against the opposition, but even against any development on their own side. So we're very interested to hear some of these details and to be able to learn what happened, and how the matter eventually, the question of electoral politics is one of the substances of democracy, and at least democracy.
Yes, but fuck, no way.
Getting a bit of interference there from a variety of sources, I think. Can everyone just check that they're muted?
Support fucking Israel. It's like, excuse me.
Just trying to mute people. I'm just I've muted David by mistake.
The governor of New York was like, "Oh, it's me. I've come. I support Israel. I'm provoked attack by Iran."
I can't see where it's coming from. I can't see anybody muted. That's David.
Okay, let me just continue and then conclude.
Yeah.
So this
David,
extraordinary
can I
development.
just interrupt? Sorry, I have got Usman on the line, and he says he's trying to get into the meeting, but he's got technical problems. He should be with us shortly.
Okay.
I'll let you carry on, David. While I'm just
let me just conclude, and hopefully it dovetails with his arrival.
He's just got technical problems getting in.
Okay, thanks, Ed.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, you know, just to conclude, so the hopes, particularly of youth, are, I wouldn't say sky high, but anyway, high. And why the youth? Because the youth is feeling that, as in West Africa as a whole, that these countries are not offering, you know, an opportunity to the youth. Most recently, I heard an interview with people from a small village on the coast, a fishing village, and they were the village from which, or this was the village from which I think something like 35 people went on a very rickety boat to try and get to Las Palmas, or one of the Canary Islands. And I think something like 28 died on the way of starvation because their engine failed. And and all of those were young people who should have been some of the brightest people to have had an opportunity in Senegal. And the reason is that they're finding it impossible to continue and make a
Roger.
living from fishing because the
Sorry, Ed. Can you just hang on a second, Ed, for 1 minute?
Sorry.
Usman's just coming in.
Oh,
okay.
okay.
I'm just
I think
finishing
we
on
We've got
this.
you. Pam's just got you. She's just letting you in. Usman.
He's in the. He's just.
Can we
he's
let
just
David
coming in,
finish? Can we let David finish first of all before Usman starts to
Yeah.
speak? Okay.
Okay, David's just speaking.
Right.
Usman.
And
You'll be on shortly. Cheers.
okay. Well, look, and so the hopes of the youth is that there'll be jobs, that there'll be work, and there'll be the reason that fishing has become impossible is because the Spanish and Chinese fishing vessels are fishing out the area right into the domestic zones, or the territorial zones, and it's impossible to make a living now. And so the youth is looking towards the government now to be able to make a complete change in the situation, rising hopes. So we hope to hear all these details. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that, David. Ed, is Usman ready there? I don't see his name popping up on the.
Yeah, no, Usman is. We've admitted him in, but he's still in the waiting room. It says joining. I think
Okay.
he still have some technical issue.
Okay. Sorry. We just then. Anybody else like to respond or add anything to what David has had to say there before Usman comes in?
Ah, he's here.
Okay.
Good.
No, he's not.
Oh,
No, he's disappeared from the waiting room, but he hasn't arrived.
He was stuck there for quite a while, Roger. He might just have to
Yeah.
let it go. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, just shit sake. Just speak. Hello?
Oh,
Anybody hear me? Hello? No.
Yeah, we can hear you, John.
All right. It's just on that last point that David made about the fishing. My understanding, and I could be wrong, is that the government of Senegal actually sold the fishing rights to the EU. The reason I know a bit about it, or I think I know a bit about it, is that one of the beneficiaries of that sellout by the Senegalese government was actually to a company in a place called Kellybegs in County Donegal in Ireland. And it's near where my father came from. And it's a place I visit every year. And the thing is that the different companies in the EU got, if you like, rights to fish off Senegal when big trawlers, big, seagoing trawlers, big factory ships. And that is why, if you like, I didn't know about the fact that a number of them had gone off to try and get to the Canary Islands. But the fact is that when Ireland joined the EU, the local fishing industry on the west coast of Ireland, at least, was decimated. A cousin of mine told me that in a small place called Teelan, which is 10 miles from Kellybegs, that there were about 35 fishing boats going out of there in inshore fishing, and that provided a very decent living for probably about 60 or 70 families in the area. Now, there were small places like Teelan up and down the west coast of Ireland, and when the EU took over, it basically was for the big boys, the big factory ships, to take over. And I think the Senegalese government sold their fishing rights to the EU. And from what you can see of African money going into government hands, very often it just ends up going into government ministers. So I think that might be an explanation
Yeah.
of thriving coastal, inshore coastal fishing industry being sold out by, if you like, corrupt politicians. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Dominic. There's a phenomenal irony in that. And if the people in Killybegs are anyway complicit with that decision, or involved with that decision, or accepted it without questioning it, that the rights to fish in Senegalese waters would be sold out by Senegalese politicians. And if that was supported by people in Killybegs, I think the ordinary person in Killybegs would be in the horrors to hear that. But anyway, I'm just saying that because I think it's an important point. I'd love to follow up on that with you, Dominic, if we do that again. Sorry, Usman, to make you wait there. Welcome aboard our little ship here. I'm going to ask you then maybe just to give your introduction, and I don't think you need any, there's not much need to introduce yourself because I think we're all a little familiar with you anyway. Okay, so fire away. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have to apologize. I'm very sorry. I got all the time mixed up, and yeah, I got ready about an hour ago, and just thought it was 5 p.m. So I'm very sorry. Now I've done a very small presentation. Can I share that? Oh, disable share.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Roger.
1 second. I have to make you co-host.
Thank you.
Just 1 second. Sorry. Where are we?
Something had to happen. I did such a brilliant preparation and was so ready to present, and yeah, I had the time mixed up. I'm very sorry.
That's all right. And you can make your presentation.
Yes, I can see. Right. Can you all see my screen, and can you all hear me properly?
Yes.
Wonderful. Great. So the revolution comes to Senegal, and it was this year in 2024. And yeah, I don't know how much has already been shared about Senegal, but I thought I would just have a quick overview of Senegal, starting from history and then politics, social, before actually going into politics, and tell everyone what Senegal has been. So Senegal, as you may know, is located in West Africa, a country that's been relatively stable ever since it gained independence from France in 1960. But the last decade really has been just a series of disappointment from one government to another, doing 2 terms and going, promising lots and lots and lots to a population that's just been younger and younger, and therefore more expecting more from their leaders, seeing what is happening in other countries through social media and the internet, and therefore just being more impatient. But the last basically 2 to 3 years have been a series of attempt presidential coups, leaders being in prison, political leaders, being jailed, and basically a lot of the old class trying to re-establish themselves within the political, within that economical crisis, political climate. And what happened very recently, a few weeks ago, was the leader of the opposition, Ousmane Sonko, and Diomaye being basically elected. Well, Diomaye being elected as a plan B for the party, but of course, Ousmane Sonko then being his prime minister. What we are going to do today is have a quick overview of the politics, economy, and social. Then we're going to look at the rise of Diomaye and Sonko, how they became tax inspectors to leaders of the executive, and then we're going to look at what next, basically. How are all the actors going to react in face to this new reality? The politics of the country really, in a few key dates. Senegal in 1959 with Mali got their independence as the Mali Federation. A lot of people actually don't know that. They think Senegal was independent in 1960, but actually it was 1959 with Mali. And then they founded the Mali Federation, which was Senegal and Mali together. After a year and with a few political disagreements, the two countries decided to go their own ways. The main takeaway there is that Senegal has always been a country that didn't want to rock the boat too much and always wanted to have close link with France, when Mali at some point needed more of the sort of Guinea and Guinea-Bissau independence. The first president being Léopold Sédar Senghor in 1960, and he chose Mamadou Dia as his first minister. Very soon, the two basically diverged because, again, Senghor was very much like, let's not hit the boat too much. Let's continue things as it is, working with France hand in hand. When Mamadou Dia wanted a green revolution, he wanted agriculture to be the heart of the Senegalese economy. So after a year, 2 years, the two men basically diverged, and Mamadou Dia was accused of a coup and was imprisoned until he was very old. Then 1968, May 68, you must all remember some of that, which was heavily reprimanded by Léopold Sédar Senghor back in the days. My dad actually being put on a list where all of the people who had played any role in the 1968 revolution could not actually further their studies in anything funded by public schools. So that's how my dad's education basically got down the drain. 1981, Abdou Diouf came to power. He was Léopold Sédar Senghor prime minister for many, many years. And then a very important date here to remember, it was 1993, Babacar Seye, he was part of the Constitutional Court. He was assassinated after an election, and that was a first in Senegal, that a key player of the politics was assassinated because of politics. In 2000, Ablaye Wade came to power, started a sort of liberal revolution. Macky Sall then took over. Macky Sall was his protege in 2012, and then very recently in 2024, Diomaye then took over with Ousmane Sonko. Economically, Senegal is a very agriculture, fishing, and very limited resource economy driven. It's always had a deficit trade balance, basically exporting much less than they are importing. Currency devaluation was a very big coup in 1994. The economy weren't doing well in the West African countries, so the currency was devaluated by 50%. That was a big coup that everyone is still remembering. Then something to remember there was the oil and gas discovered in the early 2000s, but overall, economically, Senegal has never basically heavily relied on oil and gas or any big natural resources. mainly trying to develop agriculture, fishing, but also education within the West African region. In social languages, Wolof and French are the two main lingua franca. Wolof, Islam and Catholicism are the two religions, but the country is secular. Relatively strong institution, but within a hyper-presidential system. Very patriarchal system, but with good women representation. And then, as far as the population is concerned, you can see 60% of the population are under 25. That is a big ticking bomb for anyone leading Senegal. Now, the rise of Diomaye and Sonko starts basically with these two guys having been tax inspectors and very close colleagues. Then Usman Sonko started at some point some whistleblowing, basically exposing some offshore tax haven, which led to basically his civil service being terminated by Macky Sall, the president at the time. In 2018, he published a book, Oil and Gas Senegal, before publishing another book, Solutions, as his party political manifesto. In 2019, he entered his first presidential election and came third. That was huge. 15%, first time running. That was huge. And that would tell you, that was basically going to tell you how much people had adopted him by 2019. Then February 2021, when the state basically realized how big this guy is going, they started everything. And that was when he was arrested in 2021, accused by an employee of a massage parlor of rape charges. That led
Excuse
to the
me,
first
Osman.
civil. Yeah, go on.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you've got lots of slides, and I only see one slide. If you could flip through the other ones, yeah.
Oh, you can only see one slide. What do you mean?
Yeah, it's just the introductory slide is what we see.
Oh. Okay. Can you?
Yeah.
What can you see now?
Now you can see the rise of Diomaye and Sonko.
Right. Okay. You
Yeah.
couldn't see that at all.
No.
Not till now, but please go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. I'll keep it this way then, so you can see. So you didn't see all of that over brief. Okay. So I'll keep it this way. So in October 2023, he was declared ineligible and the party decided to go to election with their plan B, and that was Bassirou Diomaye Faye. So in 2023 December, Macky Sall's party voted to delay the election. Now, this vote to delay the election was organized because they had seen how much of the people had basically decided to back Sonko and Diomaye, and they could not see any way of anyone else winning this election if we just went forward with them. So they went to the National Assembly, voted to delay the election, but it was unconstitutional. And only one institution in the country could help the country basically not fall into unrest, and that was the Constitutional Court. So everyone basically, everything hung on the Constitutional Court. Luckily for the people, they decided to overturn the president's trial. And that was a first again, because as I said earlier, Senegal is very much hyper-presidential as a constitution, even though you have other institutions who are trying to play their role. The powers of the president, the executive as a whole, is just too much, and they can put so much pressures on other institutions. So the fact that the Constitutional Court decided to overturn Macky Sall's decision to delay the election was a first, and was going to be the way forward. Because the 24th of March, the elections were organized, and Diomaye was elected the 5th president of the country. Now, let's remember, the only reason why Diomaye became president was because Usman Sonko could not, was ineligible, but therefore they decided to go for their plan B, which was Jamai. So today he's the president, and he basically appointed Usman Sonko as his prime minister. Now, obviously, things aren't going to be just smooth sailing, because we're talking about 6 decades of just stagnations. So what is the project really? Joma and Sonko manifesto have been summarized as the projects. The project being basically Pan-African, sovereign, but socialist. This is the very first party that have talked about socialism in a way that I see it fit the definitions. Obviously, from Leopold Sedar Senghor to Abdou Diouf, we had the Socialist Party running the country, but they did not run the country in any socialist way. There were the IMF here, the World Bank, the West just doing all kind of subterfuge in a way that they could not run the country anywhere socialist. Now, this new pledge is Pan-African, work with Africans, work with local allies in order to develop. It's sovereign. We're working for the people who have elected us, and we're socialists. So that is the pledge, really. But overall, really, they are promising people a systemic change in society, renegotiation of international contracts, and a fairer distribution of resources. This comes handy, really, this last one, because as I said earlier, in the early 2000s, oil and gas were discovered in Senegal. So how do you organize all of that to be well run and well redistributed in society? Is going to be a big challenge for anyone running the country. However, Western powers cannot afford to lose Senegal as an ally in West Africa. Let's remember they lost recently Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Benin through coups. And basically what you realize here is across West Africa, they do share lots and lots, whether it's historically, politically, or social. And one of the things they share really much is the fact that they have all very, very young population. So the 60% that we talked about earlier being under 25 is basically shared across West Africa. And the other thing they do share is that the revendications are the same. They basically want African leaders to work for African people. If Senegalese people elect you as a president, they want you to work for them. And that is the main thing. So while the global elite are putting so much pressure, did put so much pressure in the past on Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Benin, to the point that those the elected people could not really run the country anymore, which has led to military coups. I believe that France and their allies cannot afford to lose Senegal. Because if they do, they basically left with only then 3 countries. Let's remember, in West Africa at the moment, if you're going to talk to any countries, it's going to be either Nigeria, Ghana in the Anglophone world, or Cote d'Ivoire or Senegal in the Francophone world. These are the only 4 countries anyone can speak to, really. So they can't really afford to lose Senegal. And this is why, to the question, has the global elite been defeated? I think yes and no. It's been defeated because the status quo has been challenged, but they haven't really been defeated because they are going to reorganize and they're going to come back with more subterfuge. So what now for these guys? Right, we know that the people have voted for a deep systemic change. we also know that the old political class have been sent to retirement, and these are all the people who have been running the country since 1960 to now, including the people who took over them and were trained by them. So Macky Sall was part of them. He was trained by Ablaye Wade and then took over. But he's not the only one who basically have been sent to retirement. We're talking about Idrissa Seck. You know, we're talking about Khalifa Sall, who was the leader of the Socialist Party, but socialist just in names, really, because Khalifa Sall has nothing socialist in the way that he has run. He ran Dakar in the past, and that he's been running his party. And I suppose the last point there is that the youth have now had their revolution. Remember, we're talking about a population with 60% being less than 24, less than 25, and being run. If you went just 10 months ago to the National Assembly or just look at the government, everybody there would be 50s, in their 50s and plus. That tells you that the big disconnect between the majority of the population and the people who basically rule them. However, and these are my, you know, my sort of apprehensions. The expectations are great. You know, we're talking about decades of economic stagnation. You know, 1960 to now, it's just a long, long time. And there have been plenty of opportunities to put the country back on track, but the global elite have just decided, no, we are going to just continue using this country as part of this region, and it just hasn't worked for the many. The other challenge that I'm now going to put on the people of Senegal is, are the people themselves ready for the change they've asked for? By that, I mean, they've asked for systemic changes, but when I speak to most people in Senegal, they basically limit systemic changes to leadership changes. They think we just need to, you know, get rid of the old leadership, get rid of the old guard, you know, just change a few laws in the constitution and everything will go well. Well, I have challenged them. And my challenge is that, well, systemic change starts from every single one of us. If we take, for example, the case of corruption, you have the one who corrupt and the one who's being corrupted. And of course, the one who's corrupting is the Senegalese people by and large, and the one being corrupted being, you know, the official, or, you know, the police officer in the street or somewhere. So systemic change means all Senegalese being ready to say no to corruption at all cost. Now, are the people ready for that? You know, obviously corruption just being one single element of a whole system that's been running the country for decades and decades. And of course, my last challenge to the Senegalese people is, what will the global elite's reaction be? Because they are going to reorganize and they are going to come back. And because they, you know, out of about 16 countries in West Africa, they only have now 4 which they can officially talk to, and it's very little. So they are going to come back and they are going to do their level best to bring Senegal under their control, just like it's been for many decades. So I'm going to leave you with this photo, which basically was only a few weeks ago. These 2 guys, remember, 6 weeks ago were in prison, and today they are walking the red carpet. This is in the presidential palace, being given honors by the same people who put them in prison only 6 weeks ago. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Usman. Very, very clear description of what's happened in the last few weeks. I just add a comment or two at this stage that it's my understanding that he's nicknamed Mr. Clean because he has himself no record of corruption. He's been a tax inspector himself. He comes to power with considerable personal debts. So he's like a figure that the people actually really believe in. And so if he doesn't deliver, the fall from grace will be very, very will be meteoric in an inverse direction.
Yeah.
But just the other thing I would say, and I think to concur with your point about a change of leadership is not systemic change. So when we use the phrase revolution, we can talk about the revolutionary process maybe being kick-started by the events of the last period, but it's been more an uprising as opposed to a revolution. Whether the uprising translates or materializes into a social and economic revolution is the big question. And again, I don't need to elaborate on that because everybody knows what I mean there. And the other thing is, I think your country has a population of around 19 million.
Yeah.
So therefore, when we talk about
18.
60% of the population, we're talking about young people, 10 million people odd under the age of 25, with similar, as you say, proportions in the neighbouring countries. And before I let you go, I just want, if you can just give us a brief account of events in Niger and Mauritania. How do they regard? What is their attitude or their relationship? Because they're the two big countries. Senegal would be around 1/3 the size of France physically, whereas Mauritania, Mali, those countries would be much bigger, but population-wise might not be a huge difference, right? But again, Niger is reportedly moving towards the Chinese orbit, which will then, that feeds into your point about whether the global elites will actually want to allow events in Senegal to go in the direction which further loosens their control of events in those countries around Senegal. So if you can just have a couple, maybe just 2 minutes on that, if you've got any information in relation to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're definitely right. Mr. Clean, he was, he's been nicknamed, and in fact, even during the sort of presidential election, that they've been going around the country with a broom and basically showing the people we are going to clean up this country. And one of the things that, of course, it's metaphorical and of course real. One of the first things they have done was to organize a big cleanup of the country, an actual cleanup before the metaphorical cleanup would happen. Now, within the region, you're also definitely correct. We 60% of the population under 25, and one thing that that young population really are desperate for is for their leaders to start working for them. And that's been the main challenge in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Benin, in all of those countries, because what you would have in those countries is some elected leaders coming, wanting to work for the people, but then being unable to deliver anything really, because they are just under these big influences, these big external influences who are putting so much pressure on them, whether it is political pressure or economic pressure, but also security pressure. ISIS and all of those jihadi groups are very active in those regions, starting from Mauritania, going all the way through to Mali, and then through to Niger. And it's very endemic at the moment. Now, what you then have, therefore, is people who want really change to happen. A political class who wants to work and make the situation stable, but aren't basically enabled to do so. And therefore, unrest happening so often to the point that the army would then take over. So that little scenario exactly is what happened in Burkina Faso, happened in Mali, having 2 military coups in less than a year in Mali. That was a first even in that region. And that tells you that people are just fed up. They want to live. They just want to, for their leaders, as I keep repeating this, for their leaders to start working for them. So that's basically what is shared between all, if not most countries, if in that region, whether it is from Niger, Mali.
No problem. Much we've lost you there, Usman. Can everybody hear me there? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
can hear
Okay.
you, yeah.
Is David present there, or Ed? Can you help get Usman's back online there? Okay. Yes, sorry, Usman. Can you just finish up there, because I need to open the discussion up to the other people there? Okay, thank you.
Yes, you can actually open that. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, thanks very much for that. So anybody wishes to speak there? Just looking for any raised hands. I don't see any raised hands. I see Ian. Okay, Ian, I'll just let you in there first then. Okay.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Usman. It was a very inspiring talk. So I've been following Senegal a bit myself, and yeah, there were some things certainly that I didn't know. I didn't know they started out as whistleblowers, the 2 leaders. I think that's a very hopeful sign, given a lot of the politics in Britain and America around whistleblowing. Julian Assange obviously being the most extreme example, so that certainly gives me some hope. The stuff about the socialism of Senghor as opposed to the socialism of the new government was answered before I asked it too. I did wonder if their left reformism and his might be of a more similar kind, in which case he also got close to the West, and it wasn't transformational in that way, even though he was the poet of negritude and stuff before he came to power. So I suppose you answered about the socialism, but what about the Pan-Africanism? Because I thought with his negritude, maybe Senghor did have that kind of ideology, but then as one of the ones who was seen as most friendly to the West, and that the West were most friendly to in the 60s and 70s, obviously didn't live up to it in office. And then Diop seemed to be like a pretty commoner garden ruling party guy. And then Wade was a very interesting one. I put something about him in the chat, that in 2012, his age, Sal was one of his party men, but he split from him, so they were standing against each other when Sal came in. His age became an issue in the campaign. He was officially 86, but some people from his village accused him of being actually older. According to Wikipedia, he's still the leader of his party, much reduced party now, today. So if he was even a couple of years older, he'd be a centenarian and leading his party. So that really shows up the gerontocracy. And on a tangent, maybe another party called the Democratic Party across the pond should watch out with their leader at the current time. Yeah, I'd like to ask a couple of things. It seems to me possibly the start of some kind of a pink tide situation, like in Latin America, but now crossing the Atlantic. Am I getting ahead of myself in that? It seems to be part of a trend that's already ongoing with some of these coups. Obviously, a lot harder to smear and oppose than ones that were military coups, now that it's a democratic election having been brought in by the people against an attempted presidential coup. But some of the other leaders, the guy in Burkina Faso especially, Traore, seems to be genuinely progressive in the kind of Thomas Sankara tradition, and comes after a cycle of some presidents being driven out by protests, some coups less progressive, and in his case perhaps more ever since the fall of Blaise Compaoré, the dictator who murdered Thomas Sankara, just a few years ago, I think. Mali, it seemed to start off just more of an interleague thing, who got to be the head of the presidential guard, but turned into a very strong anti-French, anti-colonial movement. So, yeah, is this the start of a kind of pink tide situation in at least the Francophonie in Africa? Also, in terms of the two top people, the president and now the prime minister is the senior partner in terms of being a few years older, and the one who was Plan A and got banned, and they went for Plan B. And I think they were both in jail before the presidential coup, but then Plan B was allowed to run after all, and Plan A became the PM. But you said it's a hyper-presidential system, so suppose the worry would be that the disaster that happened in Grenada, where the two top leaders fell out, and I suppose the ruling class will be whispering in both of their ears, watch your back against the PM who thinks he's bigger than you. You are bigger than the president, really, but it's hyper-presidential, so you should be jealous. And it's good that they're close friends and comrades, and hopefully they'll be able to resist that. On the other hand, if real policy differences emerge, then it might get refracted through personal jealousies as well. So how much are those dangers present and being accounted for? I suppose would be one of my other questions. Yeah, and I've put a few things in the chat.
Thanks, Ian. You know the region quite well, really. I mean, thanks very much. Yeah, I'll actually start from the second question. Yes, it is a worry. It is a worry because that's exactly what happened between Leopold Senghor and Mamadou Dia, who eventually went to prison and accused of attempting a coup against Senghor. They were this close, and after 2 years, everyone saying, "Oh, watch your back, watch your back." But I personally, I'm positive that this won't happen, because these two guys are super smart, and something I've noticed, that they have that capacity to basically learn from the past. And the story that happened between Senghor and Dia, every Senegalese person knows it and can tell it, by heart. And therefore, my guess is that they are going to learn from that and not repeat the same mistake. That the president will basically focus on the big picture, the mission, the vision, the selling of the project, while the prime minister basically focuses on running all the ministries and basically making sure that the project runs smooth. And then to your first question, the West African sort of mirage, I suppose what was very interesting in the day of the inauguration was that they did invite the leader of Burkina Faso, Mali, and what's the other? And Guinea. And now all three countries being run by militaries. Now, obviously, that tells me, okay, the Pan-Africanism is working here. However, if you then put Pan-Africanism just on the side and went just democracy, rule of law, you would not invite those three countries, because they are not running their country through elections. However, they did invite them. And the other thing that was quite striking was during the inauguration, when they presented the three presidents, the crowd applauded them. Now, whatever anyone wants to take from that will be personal. But what my take on from those applaud, is that the people who have put these people in power, whether through an election or these people running their country through coup, are basically running countries of the same mentality, but also the same vision and the same ask. And what they want is people who are basically saying, we want our country to be run for the people. And I think, the global elite at some point will have to recognize that they can't just keep using these countries as cash cows, and will have to work with the leadership in order to give to the people what is due to them and make things as fair as possible. Yeah, Ian, I hope I've answered both questions right.
Okay, I don't see anybody else's hand there, but if anybody would like to speak, maybe just indicate now.
David is just, and Matthew. David, do you want to go?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Okay, well, we'll go with Matthew. We haven't heard your voice today. Oh, we did maybe earlier on. Sorry, Matthew. Come on, fire away.
Yeah, okay, no, thanks, Conrad. So very interesting. I think the major issue here, I think, is, as you pointed out, question relationship between Senegal as an imperialized country, a country that is, essentially a victim of the imperialist system, and the imperialists and how they will react. And the problem is, okay, the thing is, a revolution has to be a social question. You have to see the change in the nature of the state and the nature of social relations, and neither of those things has taken place. So you've not seen a change in either of those. You're still seeing a capitalist operation. So therefore, obviously, great caution has to be exercised in these things. In terms of, obviously, as you say, in terms of the region itself, what you're seeing is a series of countries who are throwing out the French. Obviously, French military occupations, and interested in the case of Niger. Obviously, they threw out the French. The Americans tried to work around behind the French, interestingly enough, which of course annoyed Macron incredibly, as you might imagine. They said, well, you don't mind if we throw out the French as long as you keep us here. And then, of course, recently, Niger threw the Americans out, was told the Americans to go, despite the fact that they have, the American presence in Africa is being expanded enormously in the so-called war on terror and so on. They have this massive drone base, which they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on, which is actually key to the whole strategic dominance that the Americans are trying to put together for North, West, and Africa, and even as far over as Yemen, because it's so big. It actually supplies logistics to, for drones overflying Yemen and so on and so forth. So, in those terms, it's absolutely strategically critical. So the question really then becomes, it's then to say, right, in those terms, it's one, a social question, two, the question of the relationship to imperialism. Now, the other thing, of course, in terms of Senegal, of course, as you point out, is that it runs a negative trade balance, or it doesn't all the time, and its debts. If you look at it, I just had a look at it, and its debt to GDP ratio has started going crazy in the last, from 2016 onwards, essentially. So that will be the lever that will be used, or one of the levers that will be used. Is the question, well, okay, how do you keep the whole place going if basically you're running a negative balance of trade and your debt is going up and up and up, and therefore, obviously the questions of the IMF and so on, and the lockout and all this sort of thing. And obviously, the Americans at the same time are looking at, the US as part of this whole sort of domination thing. They do run this thing, what is it, AGOA, which is like, allows certain the African countries they like a certain amount of free trade access into the American market. And so the response to, say, the South Africans raising the the ICJ case against Israel was to threaten their access to the American market through AGOA. And I'm presuming that they will do the same. And the thing is, obviously, that you've also got this whole question, there's a move to say, right, okay, we don't like the American imperialists and so on and so forth. So therefore, we'll bring in the Russians. Originally sort of now more basically state Russians, and so the Russians have actually arrived recently in Niger. So there's that sort of balance thing going on, but it's not, none of it is involved in any form of social ownership, and so in those terms, very dangerous to the populations for either side. So it'd be interesting to know what you think about. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Usman,
Thank you.
sorry, Usman, if
Yeah,
you can,
yeah.
sorry, Usman, can you
Mhm.
hear me there? If you
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
if you can just wait a little bit, okay, I'm going to let a few more people come in, and then if you can answer them in the group answer a bit later on in the discussion, is that okay?
Of
That's
course.
great. Thanks
Yeah,
very
yeah.
much, Usman. Thank you. Okay, David, fire away.
Comrades, excuse me coming in again. Just before you, Osman, I made some remarks. Let me just test out some of these points with you. First of all, the question of Pan-Africanism is very much, in my view, a rhetorical question rather than let's say, a question of the continental revolution, which it raises but then drops again. And the reason is that we have Africa is 54 countries, which is an extraordinary balkanization. We only have large countries in Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, which are, really of some import and have local big enough markets to be able to, develop manufacturing in a local basis, but not really a scale enough. If you're thinking even of a capitalist economy, but even a socialist economy, you can't have socialism in one country on the basis of very high costs of manufacturing. And imagine, which country could actually start cell phones in South Africa unless they were manufacturing, iPhones or some, one of the Chinese phones as well, because the markets are massive. We're dealing with billions of people. And Africa is only millions. And although it millions sounds a lot, but it's not huge. Now, the question for each leader and for the working class as a whole is how to break out of this, what can we say, the balkanization. And in my view, the African leadership has entirely failed. In other words, you can be very revolutionary or very conservative or, often claim to be ultra revolutionary. But if you cannot develop a market, let's put it this way, economic collaboration. Let's not use the word market, which seems already to have accepted, capitalist framework. But the same problem has happened as in relation to the Soviet Union, where you had to break out of one country. It's not unlike China, where you have masses, you have billion people as a market already. So that's one question in relation to, are any of the leaders prepared to work together to be able to develop a country and then, to develop the region or even have a continental view? And the question which is related to that is, can you have an economic plan which actually includes all? When you have 19 million people, is a fair number, but it's not huge, where you're dependent on fishing and agriculture. In fishing, I raised the question as in previous discussion or prior to you managing to get through, is has the local elite sold out the fishing rights, of the Senegalese fishermen? And I raised the question of those who've tried to make it to the Canary Islands and elsewhere, who failed, to make a living in Senegal, and the aspirations of the youth to be able to get a decent, a living, as you put it, for the leaders to be responsible of the people. And then finally, even on the agricultural basis, immediately a small country, and it's relatively small with 19 million, immediately faces world markets for agricultural produce. So those are questions of challenge. And then to conclude, French imperialism had a total control. Well, I wouldn't say total control, but it had a whole lot of institutional controls, such as the French franc or the French African franc, anyway, or some currency, which allowed greater trade within the region. Is there greater trade now? Is the region being able to rise together, or is the political divisions cemented that each country is very isolated from each other, and therefore the only basis of relationship with the outside world, let's say, is clientelism or neocolonialism to the Chinese, to the Russians, or to the French or to the Americans? Let me stop at that point, and I look forward to your response.
Just letting everybody know there's no hand indicated there, no hand raised. So in the absence of anybody else being ready to come in, I'll just ask Usman to answer the points raised by David and Matthew. Okay, Usman, go. Usman, you ready? Can you hear me there? I think there's a problem there. Can everybody else hear me?
Yeah.
Usman, would you like to respond to David there? Some of the points he's made, or Matthew?
I think he might have gone out of the meeting, Joe. I can't see him on the list.
I can actually.
Oh yes, he's there. Yeah, sorry, beg your
I
pardon.
think his sound's not working.
Can somebody send him? Can somebody? Maybe David, can you send him a message there just to say that we can't actually hear him or he can't hear us?
He has put a message up on the chat. I think we should say to him to turn the picture off and see if he use the bandwidth for the sound. If his connection isn't particularly brilliant. So he's left again. Just
yeah, he's left again. Okay. Well, look, folks. If anybody else wants to make a few points, they're more than welcome right now.
Usman's back.
Can you hear us now, Usman?
It's still connected.
Yeah. All good there, Usman? Yeah, that's great. Well, if you'd like to add any comments there, fire away. I think he's mute.
You're muted, Conrad.
He's muted, yeah, Conrad.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yeah, thank you.
So I noted 3 questions here, 1 from Matthew and 2 from David. The first one, the Russians in Africa. Yeah, Matthew, I do agree. I do agree that the Russians are moving in, the Chinese are moving in. However, I think there is this Western sort of scare, which is understandable, because if someone is losing ground and someone else is moving in, of course they're scared that whatever they were doing or whatever they were having now could be had by this new actor who's moving in. However, my deep belief is that what the French people did, to the point, that they were kicked out by, whether it is the Nigerian or the Burkinabe or the Malian, is not going to be accepted by the same people for anyone else. So basically, the Russians, whatever the Russians come with on the table will have to be discussed within a new sort of set of rules, which are never going to be the same as the old rules put in place by the French. So whatever new relationship, basically, I'm trying to explain here is whether it is with the Russians or the Chinese or whoever, is going to be a better relationship for Africans than it was when the relationship was with the French. And that is just my deep belief. I can't see any African leader kicking out a French just to replace them by a Russian, just because they love Russian as a language. No, it's not going to work. They are going to accept a new relationship that work for the people of their country. And I think that is the key element here to remember. For example, if we take Burkina Faso as an example, it's just a country that struggled for decades with French relationship. And now the Russians, they have a closer relationship with the Russians, but they're not accepting anything. Only that was about 6 months ago. There was some huge huge meeting that were being had between the Russians and the Burkinabe, with huge disagreement. And that tells you that these guys aren't just going to replace one old leader from a new leader. It's going to work for the people. If you can't make it work for the people, you're out. And we invite someone else to come and join the discussion. So I think that is the thing to remember here. And I hope that it works really for the people of West Africa and Africa in general. To David, Pan-Africanism, the meaning of it within the Balkanization, I suppose, yes, you know, that is the big challenge really, isn't it? Because Pan-Africanism is obviously a need within that region that's been so balkanized and you know, broken to very small countries that have little resources to run. Therefore, the only way for these countries to basically be emergent is to work together. So when we say Pan-Africanism in Africa, we basically mean first and foremost Africans working with Africans. Because what happens is, even West Africa, which is one of the most integrated economic zones in Africa, right? You look at every single country and check who are they doing business with globally. You'll realize it's not their neighbor. No, it's France. It's the US. It is Russia. It's other countries. So you ask yourself, well, before you go miles and miles away doing business with France, you know, for Senegal, why aren't you working with Mali? Why aren't you working with, Gabon, you know, Burkina Faso? So that is going to be the first challenge. Make sure that, you know, that you have some economic zones, you know, whether we call it market or whatever, where these countries can come and work together, reduce cost, but also have some strategic sort of economies where basically a country that specializes in wheat can produce wheat for West Africa, while another country could produce you know, vegetables for West Africa. Another country could produce oil for West Africa, and so on and so much. You know, just following a little bit what the EU, you know, has been trying in Europe, but of course not just copy everything. Just see what can work within West Africa within that framework. So I think that is definitely something that they've been trying since independence, and you're right. It hasn't worked yet because they haven't actually been given a chance for it to work. Let's face it, that is the main challenge here. Those countries have just been said no by the global elite. You are not going to put in place your own system. You're only going to exist within the system that we have prescribed for you to work in. And we are now seeing the first vague of countries saying openly no, and basically running their own countries with little repercussion. There are still many repercussions, but little basically. But if you go back 50 years ago, Guinea-Conakry, they said no. The whole country was dismantled. Until now, they haven't been able to recover the loss that they've had after independence. You know, so was Lumumba, Thomas Sankara. If they can't dismantle your country, they'll kill the leader. So now is just the first time when you see people coming together saying no together, and you know, experiencing little repercussion. And it's just the beginning, I think, of a new way of leaders starting to deliver for the many. And I hope it continues being that way for the West Africans and the Africans in general.
Thanks, Usman. I'm going to put a couple of points to you myself here, okay? there's a famous French phrase, which I'm sure everybody in Senegal is familiar with, plus ça change, c'est la même chose. And it refers to the fact that we've seen all this before, where there's these expectations arise, popular overthrow of a previously poor administration or a ruthless administration or whatever happens to be. You've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands on the streets and so on. And in that ferment lasts for so many months. And then you get the absolute inevitable, which is that the people who are really pulling the strings, who really control the economic strings in the area and in the region, they slowly move their I won't say tanks into positions, but they move and prepare for the military coup to re-establish the famous word, to re-establish order. Because that's what's flashed across the screens across the world is tens of thousands of people out in the streets waving sticks or guns or whatever, demanding change. And then you have, in the absence of the people being prepared to, being actually equipped with a vision and maybe weapons to defend that vision, the inevitable happens, and you've seen it in the neighbouring countries. Okay, so what are the questions? So rather than just leave it at that and expect that and wait for it to happen, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. One is whether you have any influence in relation to the discussions which must be taking place at a very intense level inside the country at the moment, because there would be huge ferment in the country still at this moment in relation to what is the direction of the country must take, what are the tasks for the government and so on. People on street corners must be discussing that everywhere, whether they're ordinary families or people at a higher level or whatever. Everybody's expecting change and wants it. So therefore, the couple of key questions are the ruling party itself, the African Patriots of Senegal. Do you know much about them? Do they have much of a social base in the city, in Dakar, and other places? Would they predominantly be representatives of the middle class, of the kind of well-off inside the country? To what extent, would there be any kind of open and free discussion at any level beyond adulation of the leader inside the party? Because if it's not like a critical and clinical discussion and appraisal of what faces the country, the forces it faces if it really wants to change, because wanting to do something and aspiring to do something is completely different from taking the measures necessary to do it. So to what extent is there that discussion? If it's not, in my opinion, and probably the opinion of most of the people on this website, we are wondering whether can there be another lens apart from the Pan-African lens, apart from the nationalist lens, but maybe a socialist lens, where that unless the task of actually transferring power and organizing people locally for different things and trying to improve their lot locally and bringing them with you, if that's not part of the process, then I think it's actually doomed. So I'll leave it at that with one last question instead, save me coming back in again. Corruption, you mentioned corruption. Corruption is, and I had a terrible difficulty facing up to this until a friend of mine went working in Zambia, and he was involved in building an orphanage in Zambia. And he said to get anything done, the amount of people who looked for backhanders they said it's the way things are done. So in the country, and it's not just in Africa, it's in Asia and other countries and other continents as well. If you want something done in the context of really scarce resources, you had to be prepared to pay extra in terms of payoffs to certain people. To get beyond that involves, again, a massive political discussion at ground level and a vision that lifts people out of their expectation that this is how things are done, because the fatalism around that is crushing for anybody who wants to bring about real change. So again, if you've got any comments in relation to how you think that kind of perspective can be changed. Okay, sorry for talking so long there myself as well. Okay, fire away. Okay.
No, Joe, like that's very interesting. I mean, all these points you raise are super important and super interesting. I mean, starting with, do I have influence? Unfortunately, no. When I came back from Senegal 2.5, about three and a half months ago, I came back basically disillusioned, because that was way before. That was 3.5 years of me having gone back to Senegal, starting a business, running, hitting through a lot of corruption. We'll come back to it. That's the last point. And deciding I cannot continue investing in this country. Things aren't working for the people, but also for businesses to flourish. And so in December at Christmas, I decided to come back to Britain. Do I have an influence over the party? No, I actually don't. And I'm just going to be honest. I am not there where the conversations are happening, and but I am talking to people who are part of the party, who are in Senegal and in the UK, and I know what the main thinking is, and I am trying my best as much as I can to share my hopes, but also share my my experience, and hoping that they can pass it over, and hopefully that can just be part of the wider discussions happening in the party and, well, in the state now, I suppose that's what we should say. Second question, PASTEF and the internal discussions. To be honest, since I was born in 1981, and I have looked at the Parti Socialiste, the Socialist Party, the Democratic Party, Ablaye Wade, APR, and now PASTEF. This is the first party I have seen to be so well organized in terms of democracy, but in terms of representation, and also in terms of outreach. They are so organized, and they so know to use social media and the new technology in a way that nobody in the country was ready for. If they've been able to basically survive, what are we going to say? Over nearly 10 years of basically government bullying, it's because of how organized they are, but also how democratic they were. So the fact that they were able to say, okay, they have managed to get rid of our leader. He's in prison. We can't use him anymore. However, the project is bigger than him. We are just going to take the project and give it to someone else to continue the fight, is for me evidence that these guys aren't just praying to an all grand leader, and that they have a project and they want to achieve this project, and whoever is going to help them achieve this project is going to be most welcome to lead the party and take them to victory. So I truly, I am not part of the party, and haven't been since inception, and I don't think I'm going to join the party. However, this is the most, that's the way that this party is organized. I've never seen this in Senegal. Traditionally in Senegal, if that had happened to another leader, what they would do is just keep fighting and keep fighting while the leader is still in prison, and then the elections happen, then they would lose because they would not have any representative. Well, these guys have been smart. They said, you've gotten rid of our leader. We'll take the project, give it to someone, and we are going to win still the election because our project is better than yours.
Okay.
So, yeah. Now, the local organizations of politics and corruption. Yes, corruption is endemic. Like I said, I run. I left Senegal being very disillusioned with the country, even though since these recent changes have been more positive, of course, just looking at what's going to happen later and later. But corruption is endemic. And that is my big worry. If you remember my presentation, I am basically saying these guys want systemic change, but most of the people think systemic change just means a change in leadership and a change in how we do things in local and national office. No, that is not my understanding of systemic change. Systemic change, I think, starts from the people. You know, the people who do corrupt will have to stop corrupting for the people being corrupted to stop being corrupted. And so the Senegalese people will start to look at themselves in the mirror and decide, well, am I ready to change myself? Because if the Senegalese people individually don't want to change, everything else that we have done, that they have done in the last, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 years will just go to waste, really. So they will have to change individually, plus the sort of structural change that will bring a more wider and more structural change in the country.
Okay.
Yeah, starting with corruption and going through other bigger issues, really.
Thanks very much, Usman. We may have come to the end of the discussion there because there's nobody else indicating. So unless anyone's got a final question.
Ed has got his hand raised.
Oh, there you go. Sorry, Ed. My apologies. Okay.
I think it's quite a short question. Usman, a very, very interesting introduction and explanation of this topic. In this discussion so far, I don't remember hearing anything that is fundamental to Marxism, which is the role of the working class in bringing about change on behalf of the mass of the population, the downtrodden and exploited mass of the population. I'm interested in what is the position of trade unions? What is the position of organized workers? What are the parts of industry that are large scale, such that the workers have a degree of economic power? And what role can that play in either the pushing forward of a party or the development of a party that can really, help to facilitate the kind of changes that you're talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. You're definitely right. And I suppose what these guys have achieved for me is just the beginning of what you're talking about. They have shown a few key things here. First of all, the party is very, very a working class party. These two guys, they were only inspectors within the tax system. They were in no way directors of their department, in no way, a part of the elite. These two guys, they come from very humble background. And so that's the two main guy. And then in addition to that, you look at the party and you see who are backing them, who are voting for them. Well, it's still, again, the very working class people of Dakar and other major cities. And even beyond the cities, you go to every small village and every part of the country, you will find this party represented. Again, as I said earlier, they were able to use social media, but to also use representation in a way that's never been seen in Senegalese politics. In a way that within 10 to 15 years, they were able to establish themselves in the country everywhere you go. Now, that would take 20 years. I mean, that took 26 years for Ablaye Wade to achieve that representativity across the country. It took these guys about 10 years. That's amazing. And if you ask me, is it a working class party? I would say yes, it is. it is definitely a working class party. I do have some worries, which are that amongst the Senegalese working class are also a big chunk of traditionalist and conservative, conservative in society, but also conservative in religion. But that is just my personal worry. And amongst the people who back Sonko and Jomai, you have a lot of religious leaders who at the moment, well, who have for the last 10 years been calling for changes, for example, in the law regarding gay people, changes in the law regarding the place of women in society. Those are the big worries for me about this party coming to power. But apart from those two main social changes, I think it's a very working class party. And it is a party that is truly democratic. Every is it David or Matthew, who joked about? Oh, no, that was much earlier, who joked about Ablaiwad being 80 plus and still being the leader of his party. I mean, that just tells you how crazy things still are, as in just one leader basically being the party, and after that leader, the party basically dies. That is not going to happen with this party, because it's truly democratic, and they have a project that they vote for, that they work for together, and that they want to achieve together. Yeah. So overall, Ed, that is my answer to that. When it comes to the very more deeper understanding Marxist organizations, the more technical bit, we are very far from that, unfortunately. And I suppose it's something that will come with time, after they have now reached power, that they are going to organize following the project which I introduced earlier, which basically follows this methodology, which is Senegal is about 18, 19 million right now, and you have about 4 to 5 economic zones, depending on what sort of activity you can do there. So what the project basically suggests, and this is what they're going to do, is make sure that every little zone in the country specializes in something. For example, if agriculture, for example, in central Senegal, that part is just going to be focusing on agriculture, on feeding the country, while the big economic zones, as in Dakar, Diamniadio, and Kaolack, are going to be focusing on industrialization, but also that's where the whole technology and IT is going to be developed in accordance to the new city being built right between Dakar and Thiès. And I suppose mid to long term, that answers your question, but that is not something that is just going to happen in the next 5 years, unfortunately. It will take 10, maybe 20 years before we reach the time when you truly have 4 to 5 economic zones, each one of the zones playing their key role and delivering for the people of Senegal and beyond.
Thanks, Usman. Ian had a question there. Ian, can you hear me? Your question in relation to the Sonko and whether there had been smears in relation to his politics. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw somewhere that he was accused of being in the Muslim Brotherhood, I believe, or some other Islamist group. It's when you talked about conservative religious people supporting the party, that reminded me. I'm taking it that's just a smear. It doesn't seem to fit very well with much of the rest of what you've said. Is this just something the ruling class were throwing at him as a baseless attack?
It was just smear. They tried everything they can, and that was one of the things they tried. And if you like, Senegal's Islam is very tolerant in general, and at some point they want those tolerant Muslims to break away from these guys by saying, look, they are part of the Muslim Brotherhood, you know, look at their beard, you know, doesn't it remind you of the Muslim Brotherhood in you know, in Tehran and other places? But in reality, they are just as tolerant as any Senegalese. I have never seen or heard them say anything that is remotely close to the Muslim Brotherhood way of looking at Islam. But however, the thing I just shared, you know, on the question from Ed, was that what worries me is that within the people who are backing the party, there is a strong conservative Islam, but from Senegal. It's nothing to do with the Muslim Brotherhood. This is traditional Islamic Senegal, who basically want to play a bigger role in how politics is done in Senegal, and who wants also to change some of the things that have been done in Senegalese politics for the last 70 years, and who haven't been able to do so. And they basically disagree with the place of women in society, in the Senegalese society, and they also would want a criminalization of homosexuality, for example. And so those are going to be, me personally, where I'll be focusing on, because I definitely don't. Obviously I want economic change, and for people to start, you know, having a better life in Senegal. But I don't want that at the expense of gay people being criminalized in Senegal, or women, you know, having less rights in society. Definitely not.
Yeah. Just I'm going to follow up on that, Usman, very, very quickly. Quick question again, just in relation to influence in Senegal. Whether if there's are political journals, or one or two political journals which circulate in around the membership of, as you say, a very well organized party. I would imagine there's some theoretical journal or political journal where you could possibly submit an article, and maybe one of our group could possibly write an article as well, which may or may not be published, or else give it to somebody from Senegal who may well translate it into French and get it printed. Because I think unless the discussion takes place in relation to the project and how the project is going to be realized, that is what everybody, I'm sure, is discussing. So I think if something was written along those lines, or on those lines, as well as the topic you raised as well, that an article in journals that's submitted and would be read by the membership, or a section of the membership even, just to get the discussion going, would be a very useful thing.
Yeah, definitely. There is definitely pluralism in newspapers, and they are very open for contributions, especially from outside of Senegal. In fact, I have two friends who do that regularly. One is a professor of African Studies at the University of Edinburgh, and the other one is a programs manager here in Senegal, and they regularly contribute via articles or via Zooms and other ways. So absolutely, I do agree with that. So if we wanted to do a contribution, which I can then translate, absolutely, there is no qualm about that, and I would basically get in touch, and I'm sure she would be more than happy to put me in touch with one of the newspapers for that to be published.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, folks, it's getting late now. Moving towards 6 o'clock. So I think that discussion is over. Are there any other housekeeping points you want to raise there, Roger, or David, or anybody else?
Well, perhaps I should just say that, as sometimes happens, we're not in a position to announce exactly what we'll be discussing next week. I think we've done pretty well over the last 4 years in almost every week in finding comrades right from the front line of strugglers around the world to speak. We have a couple of options that we're trying to follow up at the moment. please watch your emails, watch the space, and you'll be informed. But I would also like to say, if there are any comrades who have any suggestions or who want to volunteer, please let us know, because we welcome any contributions and any suggestions.
Okay, thanks, Roger. And just on behalf of everybody, can I really thank Usman again, because there's nothing like having a report from somebody who's actually from the country. So we're really appreciative of that. Thanks for giving us your time and your inputs there. Okay, thanks a million. Okay,
no problem. And can I just say, if you guys are interested, would you want me to see whether I do have friends within the region? Because obviously this was very much centric in Senegal, to invite, for example, a Malian, if I do have Malian friends, or Burkinabe, to come and actually speak about their experience of their own country within this, because I think they would actually talk about their country much more than I can. And I think that would be more useful for us.
that's great. Okay,
Please,
I saw Carl's hand.
can I suggest you and me get in touch about that, and we'll try to fix something up. It's a very good, very positive suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, I saw Carol's hand going up there very briefly, but it was withdrawn. And Ian's up and down again. Is just our final point you wanted to make there? No, just the yellow hand flashed up. Not to worry. Okay, I think that's it, folks. I'll just close the meeting now. Is that okay? Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much, guys. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you.